Hey everyone, this is Corey from 1301, and in today's video we're going to be talking about file I/O. So file I/O stands for file input and output, and it's basically a way in CS where you can either read data from a file that's on your computer or write data onto a file on your computer. So it's something pretty useful. We're basically just gonna talk about some of the basic things that you guys need to know about file I/O. So regardless of if you're reading or writing from a file, you're always going to have to open your file first before you can do anything with it. So a couple of the different ways to open a file, like there are three different ways that you can open a file, but they all kind of follow the same syntax. So in order to open a file in Python, you use the open method, where the first parameter is going to be the file name, and the second parameter is going to be the opening method. So the file name parameter is always going to be a string. So you can go ahead and type that in here or instantiate that somewhere else. So let's say that we just want to make a new file just called new file.txt. You can see in your file name, you always need to include your extension here, so your .txt, .csv, whatever it is that you want to create, and pass it in as the first parameter in your open. So kind of like we mentioned before, there are going to be three different ways that you can open a file. And you basically determine which way you're opening your file with this second parameter. So the first way that you can open your file is kind of like what we see here. So it's just going to be a W, and that basically means you're going to be opening a file in write mode. So what you need to know about this is that if this file doesn't exist yet, then opening a file in write mode is going to create that new file for us. So here you can see that there's nothing in this folder called new file.txt yet. So running this code will go ahead and create that. So you can see here now that there's new file.txt, and it's just an empty text file because we haven't put anything in it yet. So the second way that you can open a file is with read, or with R. And what this basically means is opening something in read mode. So by opening something in read mode, that means that you won't be able to write any new data into that file. But this is useful because it makes sure that you don't accidentally change something that you didn't want to. So this is pretty much the safest way, not safest way, let's just say doesn't change anything, view only. So kind of one thing to know about read is that if the file doesn't exist yet, you can't open it in read mode. So this only works on if the file exists already, or else it'll throw an error. So let's say if you were to try to do something like some file that we can see doesn't exist, you'll see in Python that's going to throw us an error just because no such file or directory. It basically is just saying it doesn't exist yet. And the third way that you can open a file is with A, and that stands for append. So this is similar to write, but instead of just creating a new file from scratch to write from, this only adds to the end of the file. So with write, every single time you open a file with write mode, it is going to basically erase everything and then start over. So let's just say starts from scratch. So if you had anything in your text file and you open it in write mode, whatever was in there before you opened it is going to be completely basically thrown away. So even if you don't write anything new, it'll just be erased. So one method to kind of go around that is by using append. It allows you to keep your old data and add new data. So let's do an example with reading first. There are a couple different methods you can use to read data from a text file or from whatever file you're looking at. So here you can see I have a file called anthem.txt, and this is just the national anthem. And you can see here there are a bunch of different lines, and then the last thing in the file is this question mark. So it doesn't go another line past brave. So a couple of the different reading methods that you guys will need to know, there are basically three. So you can either use the read function, read line function, or read lines function. So what this is going to look like is after you open your file, you can then use any of these three functions to get the data from that file. So let me kind of show you guys the difference between the three. So after your file has been open, if you were to go ahead and run the line file.read, what this is going to return is a string of the entire text file or the entire file that you opened, and each new line is going to be displayed as a new line character, and it's just going to be one giant string. So if you were to go ahead and do something like this and run this code, oops, sorry, let me change this to, so what I forgot to do here is input the new text file that we want to open, which is anthem.txt. So here you can see this is basically just going to get the entire file as one giant string. So here we didn't need to use a for loop or anything. And it basically puts new line characters at every single point where there was one in the text file. And you can see here that there wasn't a new line after that last line. So one thing to know about reading from a file is that basically reading kind of keeps track of where Python's currently looking at. So here you can see by reading the entire file once and then printing that, we got all of this. But then if we try to read the entire file again, it's not going to like show the exact same thing twice. And that's because in this second call here, the file kind of kept track that there was nothing else left. And so when you try to read it a second time, it just kind of returned an empty string, which is why it was just it's just like printed out this blank line. So .read returns a string of the entire file. And what this basically means is after you hit the end of your file, if you wanted to see everything in it again, what you would have to do is close the file and then reopen it. So, but what we're going to do is just, since we're going to be rerunning our code, it'll kind of do that anyways. But it's another thing that another really important thing to know is that you always are going to have to close your file, whether or not you're just reading or writing, for a couple of different reasons. It kind of just helps if you are going to be opening the same file throughout your code. Like if you have multiple functions referring to the same file, you're going to hit an error if you don't close your file, even if you're just reading from it. So the second thing we're going to talk about is read lines, or read line. Oh, sorry, So we're just going to go ahead and put that at the bottom of our code since we're still working with it. And the second thing that we're going to look at is read line. So what this function does is instead of returning the entire file as just one giant string, what it does is it just returns one line at a time, and that includes the new line character. So if we go back and look at our text file, you can see here that obviously there's a new line character here, which goes from this line to this line. But something about Python is that in the print statements, anytime you print, it automatically adds a new line as well. So that's why here it kind of looks like there were two new line characters. It's because Python's adding its own as well. So unlike read, you can make multiple calls to read line, and it will kind of keep track of where we were in the file and print out that current line instead of starting at the beginning every single time. So that's one thing to know. And then like it just keeps track of where it is in the code. So this also returns a string of just one line, which is basically found at a new line character. So the third method that we're going to talk about is read lines. So what this one actually returns is a list of strings, where each string in that list is a line in that from your text file. So kind of like with read line, we see that it's giving us just each line one at a time and printing that out. Read lines basically gets each of those same lines, but makes one giant list out of it. So this gives us an easy way of iterating through a file or through the data of a file line by line. So now if we were to go and say something like, so this is pretty useful. So if you want to do something like this, like lines equal file.read lines, now you can basically iterate through those lines and do different things on them. So let's just say print line to show you guys. So here you can see it's basically iterating through each of these lines here and printing them out one at a time. So those are basically the three ways you need to know how to read from a file. So, sorry, this returns a list. Each element is a line in file. So these are basically the three ways that you guys are going to need to know how to read from a file. And just remember which ones return strings and that read lines returns a list. So the next thing we should talk about is how to write to a file. So if you look out here, you can remember at the very beginning we made that new file which has nothing in it since we haven't written anything to it. If we were to go ahead and open that file again, so let's just change this back to file name and open this as write mode. What we could then do is use the write method. So this is just basically the syntax of this. The syntax of this is just .write, and on the inside it takes a string, which is what you're going to be writing to that file. So here you can see we opened new file.txt. So how would we basically use that is if we were to say something like file.write, and then in here you can say whatever you want to write. So let's just say hello. So here you can see it just takes in this string, and if we go ahead and run that, we can see that now that string is present in our text file. So if we were to go ahead and change this to, let's say, Dr. McDaniel. So go ahead and close that and reopen it. What you'll see is that it totally replaced what was in here before. It didn't just add it to the end. So that's kind of like what we were talking about before, where anytime you open a file as write, it's going to erase anything that was there before and just start from scratch. So that's going to happen. Basically what's causing that is every time you open the file. So if you only open the file once, you can feel free to write however many times you want to it. And you'll see that now these don't overwrite each other. But one thing to know about writing to a file is that you also are going to have to include the new line characters. So here you can see it basically just wrote everything on one line without even putting a space. And that's because Python, similarly to how it keeps track of where it's reading from, it kind of keeps track of where it's writing to as well. So it just kind of writes immediately after where it just wrote to. So you have to remember to also include a new line character at the end of, or wherever you want a new line. So here we might not want one at the very end, so we don't have to put one there. And now if we run that file, or run that code and look at our file, you can see here that it spaced everything out onto different lines for us. So just as an example that we can use to practice reading and writing at the same time, let's say we want to make a function that looks through the national anthem, counts how many times each word is present in the national anthem, and then writes that information out to another text file. So we know that we're going to have to be reading from this file and also writing to a new file that we'll create. So we can just leave this one the same name, and then we know that we're going to have to go ahead and open the anthem file as well. So here we know that we only need to read from it, so we can just do that. So what the counting method would look like is we can just iterate through each word at a time, and basically use a dictionary to keep track of how many times that word has been present. So since that doesn't really depend on a line-by-line basis, we know that we can probably just use read for that and look through, kind of split up the words from that string and count it that way. So we can go ahead and do something like this. And then we would go ahead and get all of the data from the Anthem text file. So like we saw before, this is going to give us one giant string of the entire text file. And what we can do with that is then go ahead and split that. And now we can iterate through each of those words. So what we would just do is go ahead and strip that word, just in case if there's like a new line character or anything like that attached to it. And then we can just check if that's in our dictionary or not. So let's just do like So basically, if it's in our dictionary, then we know that we can just go ahead and increment that. And if it's not in our dictionary, then we can set it. That just means we've seen a new word for the first time, and we can just set it equal to 1. So now that we have a dictionary that goes through and counts all of the words, what we can do now is just write that to a file. So if we were to go through each key in our word count dictionary, we can basically write that out to this new file that we opened up here. So that could just be a string that looks like file.write, the phrase blank is present blank times. So here we'll just use string formatting to put those actual data information in there. And here we're going to have to remember to put our new line character like we mentioned before, or else it's going to put all of that information on the same line. So then we're going to have to remember to close both of our files. So let me just go ahead and comment this out. So if we go ahead and run this, oh, my bad. Oh, sorry, forgot a parentheses. So now if we go back and check new file.txt, you can see here that it basically counted every single time there was a phrase, or like anything. It basically took everything here, split it all up by spaces, and then counted it all here. So hopefully that helped clear up a couple of the questions with File.io. So yeah, thanks for watching.